The United States, love it or leave it. My country, right or wrong. It is Friday, July the 19th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, and I am the only true conservative in the United States of America today because I'm the only one that knows and understands that socialism must be defeated, period. You cannot coexist with socialism. And my name is Ronald T. Hardgrove, and my podcast is about demonstrating how to beat the left each and every day, to win and win every time. My podcast can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I am on Twitter at Ronald Hardgrove, on Facebook at The Drill, and my podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. So I started my socio-political odyssey as a conservative Republican. I voted for Ronald Reagan. That was my first vote, and I voted for him again a second time. So I noticed that immediately as I was getting into politics that the Republicans and conservatives in particular struggled mightily to make themselves heard, to make themselves understood, and to win arguments. And so it wasn't until later on, many decades later, that I began to understand why, get some of the reasons why that conservatives were struggling and having a hard time winning. So, and this podcast is about, again, how to win and defeat the socialists in your midst each and every day, because that's the way it's going to be defeated. It is going to be defeated by the rank and file, by the so-called grassroots, by you and I defeating the socialists that are in our families, that are our co-workers, church members, and friends. So maybe even your neighbors. You're going to talk to your neighbor, and the neighbor is going to try and give you the business, the socialist business, and you need to be able to respond. And socialism is basically tools and techniques for gaining power, not maintaining it. Socialism, its biggest defect is that once socialists are in power, they have no clue what to do. If you have any doubts about that, look what goes on in any socialist or semi-socialist government structure. California, for example, has become a semi-socialist place, and all of the people in charge are just sort of flailing about. They're not really sure what it is they should do, what they should do first, what the priorities should be, how much money to put into each one of their little projects. They really are clueless. So what they end up doing is experimenting. They just throw things against the wall and see what it is that sticks. Or like they say, is judge things by seeing what works. So you can also notice that the same activities are going on in Venezuela and other countries because they eventually devolve into cults of personality. You could say that California has become the cult of Gavin Newsom, that the city of Los Angeles has become the cult of Eric, whatever his name is, the mayor. And then in Venezuela, right now it is Maduro, the cult of Maduro. It was the cult of Chavez, and you can go on and on. Every communist country had a cult. It was a cult of personality, usually whoever it is that started the revolution or was successfully overturned the previous government. In Romania, it was Ceausescu. And up until a time when there was a counter-revolution, he was put up against a wall, him and his wife, and shot dead. So, but it was the cult of Ceausescu. And in Soviet Union, of course, it was Lenin, Stalin, Brezhnev, etc. So each one of them creating their own cults of personality. But the point is that, again, it's Marxism, which is what socialism is based on, is an excellent model for revolutionary activity, and so is Saul Alinsky. He's got great models for how to agitate, for how to create problems, for how to subvert, but he has no answers for the question, what do I do now that I'm in power? What do I do now? And so that means that you're not going to look at socialism as a valid intellectual process where me and a socialist are going to sit down and have a debate. And we're going to debate nuclear weapons, or we're going to debate the deficit or the debt, or we're going to debate the defense budget or foreign policy, or whether or not we should have an increase in domestic spending, let's say, on welfare. We're not going to have any of those because they're not interested in that. They're interested simply in using everything as a weapon, everything as a tool or a technique to overthrow the current government, the current system, and to rule. Excuse me. So, I was listening to Hugh Hewitt this morning, and as I do usually every weekday morning, and he had somebody subbing for him named Kurt Schlichter. And so Kurt Schlichter played a clip of Omar, Representative Omar from Minnesota, who is one of the, I call him either the broad squad or the squalid, instead of calling them the squad. The left has given them the nickname the squad, and I'd rather call them the squalid or the broad squad, a counter slogan for these folks. But this is the way the left operates, as an aside here, is they love slogans. They love to sloganeer. So they gave a slogan to these four women. A lot of times it's the gang, but for whatever reason they decided not to call them the Gang of Four. I guess it's because the Gang of Four is a term that's already taken, and it's been used in regards to the Chinese Revolution. Mao Zedong and his wife and a couple of other people, they were the Gang of Four that instituted the Cultural Revolution in China. But anyhow, so they call them the squad. I don't follow the socialists, so I'm not going to refer to them that way. They're the squalid or the broad squad, either way. But anyway, so she's one of these people, and that President Trump had said, look, why don't you go back to your home countries and take a look and see how things are running there, and then come back and you get a fresh perspective on the United States. Words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote. And of course, the left uses that as an opportunity to agitate, to try to subvert his what it is that he said, in order to try to create unrest, make people mad at each other, get people to go at each other's throats, and again try to create a revolution, try to create what it was that Saul Alinsky was talking about, which is reaction, trying to get a reaction out of people and get a rise out of them. So she after she gets says that he's basically a racist for what he said, she's also explained to people that she's to news reporters that she's not such a bad person. As a matter of fact, she's just a regular member of Congress representing her constituents from Minnesota, and reminds everybody that dissent is patriotic. And so Mr. Schlichter is analyzing this, and he has the courage to come out and make a definitive statement and make a value statement and call her what she basically is, a liar. He just flat out just completely undercut her little, hey, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm just innocent, and I'm just doing my job. Basically, that's what summing it up in one sentence, she's saying, I'm just doing my job. And he says, no, you're a liar. And that's excellent. Come out and make the bold statement. And he gave his reasons for why he believes that she is a liar. My reasons on this is that she claims that a dissent is patriotic. But unfortunately, of course, she doesn't, unfortunately for her, she doesn't define her terms. What does she mean by, first of all, dissent? And how does her behavior differ from dissent, if it does at all? And how would I describe her behavior if it differs from dissent? And the way I would describe her behavior is as a treasonous attitude. I don't suggest that she's committed treason yet, but that she has a treasonous attitude. Why? Because she doesn't love this country. She hates it. I know that she hates it with certainty. I know with certainty that she hates this country because she has referred to everybody in the country as being racist, that the country is racist. She slanders the entire country, all 350 million Americans, if not directly, then by association. A dissent is when you critique particular ideas or policies and say, no, I'm not going to go along with that idea or policy. It's wrong. Then you can be consistent. There's consistency. You can love your country, and as a matter of fact, dissent could be considered a good form of demonstrating your love of country, that you're not going to go along with bad ideas. So you're going to stand up and say, no, I'm not going along with that particular idea. But when you slander the entire country, you demonstrate your hatred, your contempt for the entire country. And that's a treasonous attitude. And so I think that she's not only, again, a liar and that she's being treasonous, but she's somebody that perhaps we need to keep an eye on. Because would she, given the opportunity, if somebody from another country came and gave her the opportunity to actually act on that treasonous attitude, to actually betray her country, would she take it? Would she do it? So, interesting question there. But the point I wanted to make is so many pundits want to give you the facts, or what they see as the facts. Okay, she said this, he said that, they did this, and then they move on to the next subject. They don't make the value statement. They don't make a point, because they're caught up in this erroneous idea of giving the listeners the facts and letting the listeners decide for themselves. No, you make a point. You come out and say something is right, something is wrong, and you back it up. And you're prepared, if it turns out later that you're wrong, to admit that you're wrong and change your mistakes. So, be back in a minute, and I'm going to be talking about the illusion that everyone is making sacrifices with regards to, in particular, socialized medicine. Thank you very much. Welcome back. So one of the things that really bothers me about socialized medicine, the idea of a single payer, is ostensibly the way it's supposed to work, ideally, is that everybody's making a sacrifice. We're all making a sacrifice for the greater good. Nobody gets superior health care to anyone else. If you're going to have to wait in line, you have the satisfaction of knowing everyone is waiting in line. I'm not the only one, but every other person's going to have to wait in line. If we're not getting as good a health care as we might have been able to get, especially if you're wealthier than you might have been able to get under a capitalist system, then you have the satisfaction knowing that everybody's getting the same level or quality of health care regardless. But it's a fiction. It's a lie. The fact of the matter is that if you look at what goes on in this country vis-a-vis equality in terms of does everybody make the same sacrifices, the answer is no. Look at what happened with what is called Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, in which initially in the Affordable Care Act, as far as I know, everybody was included and was going to be included. Congress people, the administration. And then Congress people started to object. And the Congress people, they of course didn't object for themselves. They don't want to be recognized as being selfish and counter-revolutionary. So they say it's their staff. Their staff is very, very unhappy with having to turn in their gold-plated health care for something under the Affordable Care Act. For what's new under the Affordable Care Act. So President Obama went ahead and wrote an exemption. So everybody in Congress and their staff is exempt from the features of and the dictates and whatnot of the Affordable Care Act. So with the stroke of a pen, what President Obama did was create an elite. And I'm sure also, by the way, he's probably included his administration, maybe not just his administration, but future administrations, that all presidents and their staffs will not have to make the sacrifices that everyone else is going to have to make with regards to single payer. Sacrifices in time and sacrifices in quality. The other thing that bothers me about this idea of single payers, nobody's ever answered the question, what happens to the rich? Because according to single payer, everybody gets health care for free. Okay, so you go to a clinic, maybe you have to register like they do in Britain. Everybody gets registered with the national healthcare system, and you go into a clinic and you show them your ID. Maybe you have a special ID card for the healthcare system, and you show them your ID and you get treated and you walk away. That's it. You don't have to break out your checkbook or get a bill or anything like that. Now, I do that, okay, fine. Maybe I'm middle class or lower middle class. Maybe I'm poor. What about Donald Trump? What about Jeff Bezos? Both of them billionaires. From what I understand, a single payer, they get it free too. They're going to get free health care. Even though they could pay for it, they're going to get free health care. That's not fair. And fairness is the argument, not the argument, but the chant, the psychological cudgel that the left likes to use to beat you over the head with in order to try to make, in order to try and force single-payer health care onto the American people. And it seems to me that what we should be doing is going back. We go back prior to HMOs. There's a lot of people in this country that don't know anything other than HMOs. I grew up in a time before there were HMOs. How did we handle the poor back in those days? And back in those days, the way things were done vis-a-vis medical care was everything was based on the ability to pay. So if you had somebody that was dirt poor, they may end up paying zero. So how does a hospital or a doctor end up not going bankrupt if you're going to be giving free medical care to poor people? Simple. You transfer that cost to the rich. So if Donald Trump, one guy comes in and has a broken leg and he's dirt poor, he pays zero. Maybe the cost, let's say the cost of treating a broken leg is $200. So the guy that comes in, he pays zero. Donald Trump comes in to get his leg, maybe he pays, instead of $200, he pays $400. Because he's going to pay for his and the guy and the poor person. Actually, it probably wouldn't be 400. It would be maybe, because they're going to spread it out over all the higher income people. So it might be 210, 225. But the point is that people like Donald Trump would pay the premium. They would pay more for the same health care than the person who is destitute or is on the lower end of the economic spectrum. That is fair. But again, the left is dogmatic. The left has been told by Marx and others what it is that's going to happen, how history is going to play out, and that their job is simply to make that history happen. So they don't listen to reasoning. And again, it's so important that people understand that there's no reasoning with the left. There's no debates with the left. Sean Hannity, when you listen to his show, he has on the third hour from 2 to 3 o'clock Pacific time, he has, they call it a shootout. And what he usually does is have himself more or less as a moderator, and then he'll have a conservative and a liberal more or less debate a particular issue. Well, the liberals, or the socialists that are called liberals, are not interested in debate. They're not going to. All they're going to do is subvert the argument, subvert the debate to the best of their ability in order to frustrate, in order actually to expand their movement. They're interested in creating a movement and adding to that movement, and they want you to either join the movement or shut up and get out of the way. So all of their efforts are going to go in that direction. They're not going to bother with going out and doing research and figuring out what the facts are and putting them together in a logical way. They don't care. They don't care. They want to get in your psyche, turn you into a socialist, make you think and act like a socialist, because they know eventually you will end up voting like a socialist. So, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand lexicon, the definition of the day. Thank you very much, and welcome back. The definition of the day is sacrifice from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Get my glasses on here. Sacrifice is the surrender of a greater value for the sake of a lesser one or non-value. Thus, altruism gauges a man's virtue by the degree to which he surrenders, renounces, or betrays his values. Since help to a stranger or an enemy is regarded as more virtuous, less selfish than help to those one loves. The rational principle of conduct is the exact opposite. Always act in accordance with the hierarchy of your values and never sacrifice a greater value to a lesser one. This applies to all choices, including one's actions toward other men. It requires that one possess a defined hierarchy of rational values, values chosen and validated by a rational standard. Without such a hierarchy, neither rational conduct nor considered value judgments nor moral choices are possible. So what would be possible is impulsivity, or what Ayn Rand used to refer to as whim worshipping. It's a rather awkward way of putting it, but English was her third language. So, but it's impulsivity, where you go out and act impulsively instead of thinking your way through life, making rational decisions and choices, making plans. Now, impulsivity has its place in the life of the individual if you are very young, if you are very old, or if you are terminally ill. Then, in those particular situations, and only in those particular situations, it would be appropriate to act in an impulsive way and to forego planning, and for obvious reasons. Sacrifice does not mean the rejection of the worthless, but of the precious. Sacrifice does not mean the rejection of evil for the sake of the good, but of the good for the sake of the evil. Sacrifice is the surrender of that which you value in favor of that which you don't. If you exchange a penny for $1, it is not a sacrifice. If you exchange $1 for a penny, it is. If you achieve the career you wanted after years of struggle, it's not a sacrifice. If you then renounce it for the sake of a rival, it is. If you own a bottle of milk and give it to your starving child, it's not a sacrifice. If you give it to your neighbor's child and let your own die, it is. And she's making the point that's what altruism, which Ayn Rand claims is the ethics of the left, is asking you to do. She calls it self-immolation, burn yourself up, or destroy yourself for the common good. Destroy yourself for people, excuse me, that you don't even know. Let's see. So if you give money to help a friend, it's not a sacrifice. If you give it to a worthless stranger, it is. If you give your friend a sum you can afford, it's not a sacrifice. If you give him money at the cost of your own discomfort, it's only a partial virtue. According to this sort of moral standard, if you give him money at the cost of disaster to yourself, that is the virtue of sacrifice in full. A sacrifice, if you renounce all personal desires and dedicate your life to those you love, you do not achieve full virtue. You still retain a value of your own, which is your love. And I think we get the point that basically she's saying altruism is a bad ethical theory, because basically it's based on self-destruction. and that we are to destroy ourselves and to do so for the common good. Now, Christians get sucked into being and acting like socialists and do so easily because there's a lot of, in the Bible, instructions on helping the poor and helping those that are less fortunate. But there's also a place in the Bible where Jesus says you don't have to destroy yourself, and as a matter of fact, you shouldn't damage or destroy yourself in order to help another person. That's the drawing line between being helping people, being Christian. That's the separation line between being Christian and being socialist, is whether or not you are, in effect, damaging or destroying yourself in the process of helping somebody else. And I'll be back in a minute. Thank you. Welcome back. Last bit on sacrifice. The creed of sacrifice is a morality for the immoral, a morality that declares its own bankruptcy by confessing that it can't impart to men any personal stake in virtues or values, and that their souls are sewers of depravity, which they must be taught to sacrifice. By its own confession, it is impotent to teach men to be good and can only subject them to constant punishment. So if we take that example and apply it to the sacrifice of single-payer health care, then we can see that the single-payer health care system is designed not to help people, but to punish them. That the idea that you're going to have to wait in line and wait for long periods of time to get substandard care is not an accident, it's the point. So, who are the true conservatives? They are the people that understand that conservatism is not just political, but cultural as well. They are patriotic people who use common sense. They make judgments instead of predictions, speak clearly and definitively, and are not afraid to say no. They are open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They are consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening and have a great day.